Hi, my name is Mark Schneider. I'll be walking you through the basic procedure of building a standard Videotel booth. Although the booth you purchase from us may vary greatly, they all follow the same concept. They're all held together with ceiling steel, they're all held together with main booth steel. The panels kind of come together in the same form, so don't worry about the size and so on. The housing's still going to mount the same, the booth will end up basically the same. The booth I'm going to show you is our most common booth, and this is probably the one you've purchased. Before you begin building your booths, I highly recommend you check over the area one more time. Make sure you don't have any pipes in the way or any obstructions, your walls are all clear. You also want to check to make sure that the total distance you have allocated for your booths is plenty. Okay, let's get started. One of our first steps is we're going to use a chalk line to mark out the front of the booth so we can line them up as we go. We don't want to try sliding them around when we're all done. I'm actually going to draw two lines. One line is going to line up the floor and the panel, and the next line is going to line up the door once we put that on, which is later. So now we're going to start with the end panel, and you want to make sure that every panel you grab, you have the arrow facing up. This is very important because the steel is going to attach to these pre-drilled holes, and the spacing is very critical. So now that this is my last piece, I want to make sure I attach all the bolts and everything I need to ahead of time because I'm not going to be able to tighten them once I'm done. So basically, we're just going to attach some steel here. You want to make sure the foot of the steel is facing down. That's going to actually what screws into the floors. I'm basically just putting one on each side like this. This is the only panel that you're actually going to use a 1-inch bolt on because it's only a 3/4 inch panel with a piece of steel. The only hole you're not going to use a 1-inch bolt in is the top bolt. We're going to use a 1 1/4 up there. Basically just slide your bolt in and you're going to use a cap nut. Now I'm only going to finger tighten these for now. We don't want to use a wrench on them until the very end because there is some adjusting we need to do. So basically we're just going to go down the row here on both sides and we're going to put in a total of 8 bolts with cap nuts. Now that we have our main booth steel attached, we're going to go ahead and put the ceiling steel on. It's basically just going to lay against the panel like this. On this one we're going to use a 1 1/4 inch bolt because we have to go through a panel and 2 pieces of steel. And we're going to use a regular nut on this one. Don't need a cap nut because nobody's going to see it. And we're just going to do the same on each side. You want to make sure that the angle iron is mounted like this, and you also want to make sure that the foot is pointed down. That's actually going to screw to the floor once we have the booth together. Now we're going to attach the bottom monitor panel. It's indicated with a B. You want to make sure the arrow is facing up. Now you just slide this thing in here, you line up the steel, and you pull the panel over. We're going to use a 1 1/4 inch bolt here. We're going to use a regular washer and a regular nut. Once you get that on, you're going to do the same for the bottom. Now the next panel we're going to put on is a seat side panel, but we need to prep the board first. We're going to use another piece of steel, and this is going to line up just like the rest of them. Going to slide through a 1 1/4 inch bolt, use a regular washer, regular nut, and then do the same on the bottom. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to slide the floor in. We need to do this before we get the next panel on, otherwise it's quite hard to get in. A lot of times it'll just slide in. Sometimes you might have to lift up the steel. But you want to make sure you square it out. Next panel we're going to put on is the seat panel, and again you want to make sure the arrow is facing up. The other important thing about the seat panel is it has 2 holes here. This is actually what's going to hold your seat bracket on, and you want to make sure these are towards the front of the booth. Now we're just going to slide this thing over. We're going to line it up against the steel we've got there. And on this one, we're actually building another booth next to it. So what we need to do is put the steel on there for the next booth. So again, I'm going to have the foot down, and I'm just going to line these holes like up, and now we have a double steel. I'm going to use a 1 1/4 inch bolt. I'm going to put it through the steel, the wood, and the other piece of steel, and I'm going to put a cap nut on it. The next step is we're basically going to double up the steel on the front side of the booth also. So again, face the steel in the same way. We're going to push a 1 1/4 inch bolt going the same direction as the rest of them, keep it all uniform. And again, we're just going to use a cap nut to secure it. Wait. Our next step is we're going to put the ceiling steel on, and again we need to double it up, so we need to have steel on both sides. In this situation, Greg's going to slide a 1 1/4 inch bolt through his steel, and it's going to mate up with mine, and then I'm just going to put a regular nut on there. Same on the other side. Now we're basically going to secure the booth to the floor. You want to make sure that the floor is flush with the steel on both sides. Once it is, we're just going to drive a 3/4 inch sheet metal screw straight down. We're going to do the same on all 4 steels. Next panel we're going to put in is the top monitor panel. Again, you want to make sure the arrow is facing up. Definitely want to have a partner doing this one. Again, we're going to use our standard 1 1/4 inch bolts. I'm going to slide it in. He's going to put a washer and then a regular nut on the other side. Now, depending on the type of booth you have, you might be putting just bolts on the bottom and then screwing the top, or you would be putting bolts in all 4 of them with the ceiling steel. In this configuration, we're actually just going to use bolts, and then we're going to screw the ceiling steel on later. So we're going to do all 4 of them here. Okay, so now this steel here, we're just basically going to lay it on top of the other 2. And then we just want to center it in the panel, and then we're going to use a 3/4 inch sheet metal screw to drive them in. Now that the booth is somewhat secure, we're going to slide it over to the wall and we're going to line it up on our front edge over here. Once we slid the booth all the way to the wall, we're just going to bring it forward and flush it up against our first line. Now that we have the first booth built, we're basically just going to follow the same procedure and go all the way to the end. I'm going to start with my bottom monitor panel. I'm going to put the seat side panel on. I'm going to put the floor on, top board, just move on down the line. Now we're going to put the doors on. We do have to go in order. We're going to start with the left. We're going to use a left-handed door. It is labeled on the side. Now when you go to lay this thing down, make sure you lay it down with the hinge on the ground. So we're going to slowly tilt this thing over. So once you've laid it down, you want to have your partner hold the door steady, and you're basically just going to remove the screws out of this foot. Now the next step is we're just going to tilt it up slowly while your partner goes in the booth. And really all you're doing is just putting it in place. Now depending on how crooked your floor is, some of these holes might not line up. So what I suggest doing is taking a screwdriver and using that to line up your holes. And then you can lift and lower the panel accordingly. And on this one we're going to use 1 1/4 inch bolts, and my partner is going to use a cap nut. Now since we're screwing the ceiling steel on, we're going to go ahead and just put bolts in the top holes also. And then we're just going to do the same to the other side. Okay, now to get your partner out, since you don't have a doorknob on there, we actually have to pull out the latch using like a screwdriver or a pair of needle nose. Once we have the door in place, now we're just going to attach the last piece of ceiling steel. And again, this is just going to rest on top of the two existing pieces. We're going to center it, and then we're just going to screw it to the door. Now it's just putting the doorknob on. Basically, it's just two pieces. To get it apart, you're just going to press this little button in here, which releases the front end of it. You're going to also release this plate. The other end is going to slide through the hole, lining up against the latch. Then on the inside, you actually need to remove these plates from each other. And the plate is labeled. It'll show you the top and bottom. Just going to slide that on, and then you're going to put your screws in. Make sure you don't over tighten them because it will keep the door from opening smoothly. Basically just get it tight enough so this metal is flush against the door. You can also test it at that point and make sure it opens okay. Now we're just going to put the cover plate back on. And there's a little notch on here that'll show you where it goes. And it basically just snaps into place. Then you put your doorknob back on. Again, you have to press in that small little button to get it in all the way. And you're set. The next part we need to put on again is the T-steel. This is basically going to hold the two booths together. What we need to allow for is the piece of trim that's going to be installed on the booth later. So basically we lay a piece of trim on that you can cut off from the shipment we sent you, and you're just going to line up the T-steel to the bottom of the trim, and then you're going to secure it with a 3/4 inch seat metal screw. Now the next door we're going to put on is the center door. Works the same way. We're just going to slide it right in between the T-steel and the booth steel. And then put the same bolts in. Now before we put the housings in, you want to make sure that you either have enough room behind the booths or that your main booth cables are already run. Because once the housings are in, it's going to eliminate a lot of your access area in back. So what I'm going to do in this example is I'm actually only going to put 2 housings in, and in the next video I'm going to put the 3rd housing in when I run the cables. So when you get your housing, basically you just want to tilt it over onto the bottom. It's just going to lean over like this. These 2 foam pieces are going to slide right out. And then you're just going to pull the housing out. At that point you can get rid of the box. Once you have the housing out, you do want to remove these 2 boards. You will not be able to get them out once they're installed. I do recommend leaving this bottom board in with the wire tie still attached, because when you go to slide the housing in the hole, if those wires are hanging out, you will damage them. So basically now we're just going to remove these boards. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull out this accessory kit. This is going to hold all your various cables, your touch panel, your lock sleeve, and the screws needed to fasten the housing into the booth. You can basically just put everything to the side for now. And we're just going to get this little box out here. Inside the box are the screws you need. Just put everything else to the side. To attach the first part of the housing, you're going to need these 6 1-inch screws, and that's it. Okay, when you're ready to install the housing, you want to make sure your booth door is open and everything's ready to go. When you pick this thing up, you're basically just going to grab it like this. You're going to carry it to the booth. Okay, now you can install this with 2 people, but you can definitely do it by yourself. There's a little bit of a trick to it. Just grab it right up here, grab it on the bottom, and just kind of tilt it up. Then you walk it in the booth. Once you're inside, just reverse it. And slide it in. Now we're just basically going to flush out the housing to the side of the steel So you want to get your 1-inch screw ready, and then you're just going to slide the housing all the way over until it's flush. Then you want to do the same with the bottom. Go ahead and put in the rest of the 4 screws. These are actually only a temporary fastener until we actually use the 2-inch screws that are from the inside of the housing, which will be shown in the next video. Next thing we're going to install is the vacant and occupied lights. You'll find these in your accessory kit. Basically, they just go above the booth. Doesn't matter where, but usually we do the vacant on this side. And it's just a regular nut you tighten on the back. The occupied goes right next to it. To tighten the nuts on back, you can use the nut driver we've included with your spare parts kit. Just tighten it nice and snug, make sure they're straight. Okay, now we're going to hook up the wire to it. In the same accessory kit, you're going to have a little bag with some lights in it. This wire is basically going to run from the lights all the way to the back of the booth. Now the 2 lights on there, you have 2 different colors. You have a green and a black, and you have a red and a yellow. The red and the yellow goes in the occupied, and the green and the black goes in the vacant. Basically, these just snap in behind the buttons. They just kind of click in. Then I'm just going to take the other end of the wire, I'm going to throw it over the back of the booth. And now, just so it doesn't interfere with the ceiling, I'm going to go ahead and staple the wire to the side of the wall. Once you've done that, you just go on to the rest of the booth. Now would be a good time to tighten up the front of the bolts, basically meaning the bolts on this side and on this side. Now when you do this, you want to make sure that somebody is watching the door jamb on the outside to make sure that this doesn't close up or get too wide as they're tightening them, because it will adjust the size of the booth when you're doing it. So as he's doing it, just kind of watch him and make sure it's staying stable. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install the seat bracket. This bracket sits in the booth basically like this. First thing we need to do is line up these holes here and insert the bolts. And just go ahead and tighten them up. Now it's ready to be installed in the booth. So Greg here is going to slide them through from the outside, and I'm just going to attach 2 small regular nuts. I'm only going to thread it a few times because I am going to have to press the seat bracket over to line up the other side. Now what I want to do here is basically I want to line up and make sure the seat is totally straight, and then I'm going to go ahead and drill through the door panel. Now before you do this, you want to make sure that the door is either closed or it's half open, otherwise you're going to drill right through the door. So once you've got it lined up and your door is okay, just drill right through the panel. Okay, now on the outside you're going to use a longer bolt. You're going to use a 2-inch bolt, and basically same thing, just putting regular nuts on there. Now you can just go ahead and tighten up the bracket. Now we're ready for the seat. Basically, the 4 bolts are just going to slide through this little plate here. And then you're going to use the same regular nuts to tighten them on. When you go to tighten these, don't go too hard on them, because it will crack the fiberglass. You're just basically securing it. The first time you add any weight to it, it'll drop down a little bit and then it's solid. Now we're just going to install the floor strip. Basically just slides in here. And we're just going to put in 3 screws. Now before we put the ceiling in, we're going to want to put the toggle bolts in. These are what holds the ceiling in. Basically, you're just going to slide the bolt in. You're going to thread the butterfly on just a couple times. And then you're going to do all 4 holes that we have in the ceiling here. Okay. Now the ceiling consists of 2 pieces, a metal grate and a plastic. Now the metal you want to be very careful with because the edges are quite sharp. When you put the metal in, you're going to slide the front end in first so it goes underneath the cables. Then you just want to rest it down. The second piece, you're probably going to have to guide with like a screwdriver because it's a little hard to reach from inside. Now once you make sure that the ceilings aren't held up on the bolts at all, basically you're just going to push these toggle bolts right through the ceiling. Once they're all secure, you take your drill and you're going to push up on the ceiling and you're just going to drill until it's flush. Don't over tighten them because those toggle bolts will break fairly easily. Now you follow the same process with the rest of the booth. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to silicone the booth. You want to make sure you silicone the inside and the outside of the booth to make sure no moisture gets in there and ruins the particle board. With your silicone, you basically just want to cut off a small piece, pop a hole down the center. Now you're just going to run a small bead around every part of the booth. That includes the feet, the aluminum floor, everything. Once you have a small run done, just take your finger and just smear it in. It presses it into the cracks. Make sure you got a real good seal. Right now we're going to install the trim. One thing you might want to notice is that between some of these booths, some of them might be quite a bit higher. That's basically because of the adjustments in your floor. You can either just leave it or you can trim it off with a jigsaw. Ours are fairly straight, so we're just going to leave it like it is. Then we're just going to lay our trim on top of the booth, and we're just going to nail it in with some tack nails. Okay, the last thing we're going to do is put the sticker on. Before you do this, you want to make sure your door is clean, so there's no dust or oil on there. Now you could just eyeball it, but I like to mark a line on there. So basically right now I'm just going to find the center of the door. And then, because I want them all the same, I'm going to come down right about there. Next, you're just going to peel off the backing. Don't go all the way down, just bring it down a couple inches. Now you're just going to line up the sticker on the door. And you're just going to cover that little dot. Once you got it in place, you slowly rub in the whole sticker, going very slow, covering the whole length of it. This is basically just working out all the bubbles. And you just slowly peel the backing off as you go. Once you get it all pressed down, just grab a corner of it, start pulling real slow. Take your time, otherwise you'll pull the letters off. And you are done.